Brown Ledge behind me. And then also, there are some emergency evacuation procedures. So in case of emergency, I think instead of going through this whole thing, just see us and follow us. It will take you down the stairs, and we'll basically meet across the street on San Joaquin and Weber outside by the shade area next to, in the corner in the shade area. And again, county staff will help you out as needed. And Chair, that I'm going to hand it back to you with those housekeeping comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Got a new toy. And before I start, if I seem like I'm about 6 inches off of this chair this morning or today, I'm age 16 this morning. I became a new great grandfather. So yeah, Emily Marie. So awesome. Welcome. So if you please stand, if Miss English, would you please lead us in the flag salute? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sonia, can we please have roll call?
Steve DeBrum.
Present.
Pam Ibeck.
Present.
Alice English.
Present.
Ann Baird.
Here.
Bob Mooney.
Here.
James Grunsky.
Here.
Mike Morowitz.
Here.
Oscar Valdez. Summer Panino.
Here.
Angel Ann Flores. Esau Hernandez.
Here.
Mamie Starr. Richard Silverman. And Steve White.
We'll see if Mr. Silverman comes on. I know he was going to be on. Okay, in your packet, you have the minutes from the 7/14 meeting. Has everyone had the opportunity to review those? Is Mr. White, did he get a copy of the minutes from the last meeting?
Got the meeting invite, which would have had all that, so.
Okay, that's fine. May I have a motion, please, to approve?
Second.
And a second. It's been properly moved and seconded to move on the 7/14 minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. Item number 4, agenda additions and deletions. Do we have any agenda additions or deletions?
No, we do not. Or do we?
Do we have anyone that's online that's,
No, although Summer Panino has indicated online that she is here.
okay, very good, thank you. First, I would like to introduce, from District 3, Mr. Stephen White, the alternate RAC member. So, Mr. White, just want to stand up and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Steve White. I'm a lifelong Stocktonian and been working in the field of commercial real estate here for the last 15 years or so, with an emphasis on San Joaquin County property. So I've gotten to know, you know, all the little cities and towns that never really got to explore growing up here in Stockton. So look forward to working with everybody, and happy to be here.
Thank you very much and welcome. Okay, we'll move on to public comments. Anyone online have anything? Glenn?
So, Dave Bollinger did our compilation of the public comments from our redistricting email, and nothing significant, primarily questions about redistricting and employment opportunities related to redistricting. But you all have copies of those as well. And, but not as colorful as our last meeting, the comments this time.
Anyone else? Any other comments? And no one online, correct? Okay, very good. We'll move on to the RAC disclosures. Does any member have anything to disclose? And I'll look over to Dave, make sure that there's nothing there. And anyone here in the audience? Very good. Thank you very much. Then, Glenn, the RAC community contacts.
Yes, so a couple of our RAC members have made contact with the following associations and entities: NAACP, the Asian Pacific Self-Development and Residential Association, Gladys Aikida, Little Manila, San Joaquin Hispanic Chamber, San Joaquin Farm Bureau, North Valley Labor Federation, Stockton Sikh Community, Stockton Muslim Community, League of Women Voters, Restore the Delta, Stockton Strong, and District 4 Agricultural Community of Interest Contact Robert Martin.
Would you please provide the entire committee of the list of those members who have been contacted, please?
I will do, Chair.
Okay, the next item is I want to introduce Jolene Voorhees to present state redistricting.
Yes,
Okay.
hi, Jolena Voris, with the CAO's office here in San Joaquin County. Just to give you an update on and to inform you on what's going on the state side of redistricting. So I know you're involved in the supervisorial side, but the county is also working on an effort on the state side of redistricting. So on the state side, of course, they're involved and in charge of the state assembly seats, the state senate seats, the federal congressional seats, and the Board of Equalization. And so right now, the state, it's the California Citizens Redistricting Commission that's in charge of redistricting all of those seats. So back in 2010, the voters of the state of California passed Proposition 20, which changed the whole process of how we draw the lines in California for those seats. It used to be the state legislature that did that. And a lot of times that was, most of the time, it was done behind closed doors, and it was a secret process. And the only public hearing they really had was when they came out and announced the new districts, so and presented it to everybody in a public hearing. So the voters voted this and created this new commission back in 2010. So in 2011, when they redrew the lines, that was the first time they had this new Citizens Redistricting Commission. And the commission is made up of ordinary citizens. You can't be an elected official. You can't be a lobbyist. You can't have any contact. So it's very strict about who can be appointed to the commission. Of the 14 commissioners that are seated now, and they're completely different from 2011, it changes every 10 years. There are 2 commissioners that represent San Joaquin County. One is Trina Turner from Stockton, and I'm going to really butcher the name, so if you know this person, please apologize. Neil Fornaciari from Tracy is the other commissioner. And so because of the delay, as I'm sure you're all aware of the census data, what the commission is doing right now is holding these communities of interest hearings all around the state via Zoom. They're not holding any in person, and hearing from all of the communities of interest until the data comes out. And they have them and they've separated the state into 11 zones, and our zone is Zone F. And so far they've had one hearing specifically for the Central Valley. That was on July 12th. And there's another one coming up on August 4th, and there's another one on August 25th. And so, of course, they have hearings for every zone. So there's one for LA, there's one for the Bay Area, and they have a couple or 3 every week. And they can be very long or all day. So if you're really bored, you can call in and listen to what all the citizens are saying about how their district should be redrawn. They're actually really fascinating. I've listened to a few of them. so last time they didn't have these community of interest hearings in 2011, so this is kind of a brand new process. But the reason why we're, as a county, really watching this closely is our Board of Supervisors directed the County Administrator's Office to create a advisory group and really get the word out to our residents and citizens about what's going on in these hearings and have our voice be heard before the commission. And be sure people were aware, and this could really impact how they're going to be voting for the next 10 years. And so, of course, we have 2 main assembly districts, Assembly District 12, which represents the southern part of San Joaquin County. We have Assembly District 13, which is Mountain House, Stockton, Thornton, Tracy, and part of San Joaquin County. Senate District 5 represents all of San Joaquin County. And then we have 2 congressional districts, CD9, which is the majority of San Joaquin County and portions of Contra Costa County and Sacramento County. And we have Congressional District 10, which is a portion of San Joaquin County, Tracy and Manteca, and all of Stanislaus County. And so we had our first advisory group meeting this morning. We had about 25 community groups there participating, and we had some really good feedback. And we're also going to be doing an online survey of all the residents to see what they think. So you'll be seeing that shortly from us to get feedback, to see what they want to see in this redrawing of the district so that we can have hopefully a unified voice before the commission. Just wanted to say I can provide talking points to any of you if you get a lot of questions from people, because I know there's some confusion between the supervisorial effort and the state effort. But if you ever have any questions or need any help on that, feel free to give me a call. Mo is also helping me out. Oh, hey, Jeff. It's helping me out on the state redistricting side as well for the county effort. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just because we are in the position which we are in with the supervisoral district, I think it might be appropriate to provide all the commissioners or the people on the committee with that information, because I know sure as heck as anything, we're going to get a question about the state districting and what might take place. So if you can support us with that, that'd be wonderful.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so let me go online first. Is there anyone online that has any questions? Ms. Voorhees? Nothing? How about here? Anyone here have any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Certainly much appreciated all the information that you did provide to us. We're going to move on to another action item to consider and vote on the amendment to the San Joaquin County Redistricting Advisory Committee Rules of Procedure. And Ms. Merrill, would you please take that and just tell us what we have in our hands here with all this information?
So don't read it yet.
Okay.
It'll like ruin the surprise.
Okay.
Yeah, so just hands off. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through pretty quickly. And I do have a PowerPoint, and they gave me a microphone and a clicker. Just like best day ever. So what we're going to do is go through a quick PowerPoint. Part of the reason that I opted to do a PowerPoint is so that we can provide it to you in your binder and that you'll continue to have that as a quick access point. It's not, necessary for today. You can follow it or not. The same things I'm going to be saying are in the PowerPoint. But in reality, I want to make sure that you have it for your binders. So that's really what it's for. The idea with each of you is that you always feel like you have at your fingertips what you need in order to communicate and what you need to be informed. So this will hopefully help with that. So essentially, although the action item is the proposed revision to the rules of procedure, it really is about making sure that you know and are making informed decisions on how to or not to use your personal email accounts and your social media accounts. So that's really what the goal is today. And piggybacking off of that is the proposed revision to the rules of procedure. So what we keep talking about, you hear over and over, both on the redistricting and of course you just heard from Juliana on the congressional, is outreach, outreach, outreach. Well, we know modernly the way that we do outreach is through email and social media. So I am now going to be a little bit of a wet blanket and tell you there's some downsides and some concerns we have about you doing that kind of outreach, email and social media platform comments and thumbs up and meme posting, my favorite thing ever, on RAC Business from your personal account. So as you make those decisions, hopefully after today, you feel fully informed about how to do that, and we can give you the tools to change how you're doing that if we need to do that. I feel really tall.
I'm really short.
Okay, fair. Okay. All right, so as we look to do this, we're going to hark back to our original training. You are RAC members and alternates. You are what we call public officials. So you are a public official as defined under the government code. So when I use that, I'm talking about you. So I may refer to you as public officials. I might refer to you as RAC members or alternates. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you. So essentially, I'm not really even sure where this starts. Oh, okay. So we're going to start with some background. So what I want you to understand is the way that the law has evolved on this topic. For many, many years, as public officials, if you were communicating in a forum that was not the specific government site or your government email, then in fact it was not a public document. And in 2017, and some items leading up to this, essentially City of San Jose versus Superior Court was a ruling that found that it really pierced that veil, and it said just because you, public official, are sending something from your, teddybear57@gmail account, if it is on public business, I know that's your account, Steve. If it is on public business, it is still a public document. So when a city employee, or we're going to substitute, right, city official, uses a personal account, and in that case, we're talking about email, your smartphone, social media, to communicate about the conduct of, there are buttons happening. Okay. The boss will fix it for us. About the public business, then in fact, that communication is a public document. What does that mean that it's a public document? What that means is if the press or the public requests public information, public documents on that topic, then county officials have every right and ability and obligation to sift through your teddybear57@gmail account and find responsive documents. So that is what that means. So if you use your personal phone has public documents on it. If in fact someone asks for those documents under City of San Jose versus Superior Court, we as the county can and will go into that phone and look for those responsive documents. You need to be aware of that, because depending on what you do or don't keep on your phone, judgment-free zone, we are going to need to look through that. Also, when a document is a public document, there are both rights and obligations, right? You also have an obligation to keep that document consistent with our document retention or destruction policy. So we as a government then have liability, bad word, that is a bad word. Okay, so, right, liability is bad. That if you didn't follow the document retention or destruction policy, we now have additional liability. So that's what it means when I say as a public official, if you use your public account, that communication becomes a public document. That's kind of a strong foundation for where we're going to move in this training. So what is a personal account? Like I said, teddybear57@gmail. It's your own non-county issued email account. It is your personal or non-county Facebook page. Remember, the RAC has now established a Facebook page for the RAC. The RAC as a unit has a Facebook page, and we have a Twitter, and we have a Snapfish account or whatever. And so, face hand. So we have those accounts for the RAC as a unit. If you are using another social media account or an email that hasn't been issued to you, that is what I mean when I say personal account. And some of you work in government, and this is like so boring to you because you've heard it 1,000 times, but a lot of you don't. And to the extent it's a foreign concept, I'm trying to kind of hit that balance between, the knows and the maybe not know so much. So that's kind of what that means by personal account. So again, any of those accounts is going to create a public record. So additionally, in addition to becoming a public record, this is where we get a little even more complicated, is that, if I don't remember what's on the PowerPoint. So in addition to commenting on an email, if you use a social media platform, your personal social media page, or even if it is your professional social media page, if it is a non-county social media page, and you decide to then use it in your public capacity. You are now using it as RAC member Grunsky. Then in fact, that may become a public forum. So instead of being a private, personal social media account for new grandbabies and bikini photos, it's becoming a public forum. When something is a public forum, you now are very limited in your ability to block people, to tell a troll, to strike that comment, to somehow limit their comments or their interactions on your page. So you post about a grandchild, they post about, RAC or whatever, you now have to let that stand, and in fact are limited in your ability to control what was your personal page, because now it's a public forum. It is now the equivalent of the medieval public square where business was done, like jousting. That was weird, sorry. Okay, so one thing I want to preface this. So you can see here what I say is, if your personal social media page is likely to be deemed a public forum, how do we figure that out? The way to figure that out is whether you're identifying yourself as a RAC commissioner. Is it clear that that's the purpose of this page, is for you as a RAC commissioner? Are you using it to address constituents? In terms of your RAC, in terms of the RAC, it's very different. Are you using it to get information, substantive information on the RAC out to constituents regarding mapping or regarding the business of the RAC? Are you sharing information about the public business? Meaning, and we'll narrow this down a little bit, but also, are you providing access to constituents? Are you saying, hey, you want to know about superfessorial redistricting? Contact me. Comment here and I'll make sure I get you the information. That's a very clear, opening up that page for access to constituents to comment. That's very much going to move you into the public forum space. So again, we're still kind of laying the foundation, but if you are talking about RAC business on email, let's flag that it's a public document. If we're using a social media page for public business and we're using it for these items and some others, we're likely moving into both a public record, but also a public forum. And so there's some phrases that you want to be familiar with, because they're going to have different effects. All right, so that's kind of where the foundational use information. So now, in regards to the fact that you're a public official, and we're talking about conducting public business, when you're talking about superfessorial redistricting, then we know you're doing government business, and of course, dun dun dun, the Brown Act, right? Public business can only be conducted pursuant and consistent with the Brown Act, which is found in the Government Code. So, here we'll click. Okay, my lightsaber is not working. Okay, so under the Brown Act, we kind of beat this horse to death, right, in the first training. Thanks, Craig. The Brown Act, to summarize it as succinctly as possible, is a transparency law. This is to prevent those backroom meetings. Jolena even kind of commented on them specifically in regards to redistricting, right? Public work should not be done in the back room. It is to be done in noticed public meetings. Transparency. That is the entire purpose of the Brown Act. And so government work is to only be done in noticed public meetings. So if there is work being done on superfessorial redistricting, it can only be done in noticed public meetings. So if you are communicating or doing the public meeting, public business through an email or a social media, right, we're flagging, when is that a Brown Act? That's where our brain is churning and going. Okay, so now what I want to do is kind of go through, now that we have that foundational knowledge, we'll kind of go through quickly the uniqueness of each one. The Brown Act is back. Did you like that title? That was my creative title. Oh, whoops, okay. There we go. All right, so again, the reason for the PowerPoint is not necessarily that you have every word today, but in fact, you know where to flip in your binder to say, okay, I have information I think I'm going to share on my personal email. What are my risks? What are my benefits? All of that. So again, if you use that personal email account, it is subject to California Public Records Act requests. That means county officials will be going through your emails and looking for responsive documents. Any email that involves RAC business can also be found to be a violation of the Brown Act if that communication constitutes a meeting, right? Because then it's not a noticed public meeting. This is Not a super common problem, but it is a big problem if and when it arises. So what you want to look at is, remember, an email meeting, and this is in your first training too, but this is clarified here, would be an email message that's on RAC Business. That's kind of threshold 1, and that includes a majority of the RAC members. That's a meeting, right? And we're conducting RAC Business, and therefore that is a Brown Act violation if it's not in a noticed public meeting. Okay. The other way can be a series of emails that ultimately involves the majority of the members. So this is why, 1, Zoe does not believe that reply all should exist on this planet. 2, be very, very careful when you go, well, did you know, this is so-and-so's opinion about this. I have some concerns. What do you think? That can constitute a meeting, right? There's a few terms and there's some clip art we can use for wagon wheels and cereals and all of that. But those are the 2 biggest things I'm going to flag to you, is how email can ultimately lead to a Brown Act violation. And I want you to be very, very aware that by sending even just one email, you may begin a process that puts you into Brown Act violation territory. So again, today is about making sure you have the information you need to make informed decisions. So the third item besides public record, and then this potential Brown Act violation, is that an email that has a substantive comment on supervisorial redistricting. We have an obligation under the Elections Code to gather and keep a record of all of the public meetings on redistricting and gather all of those documents. If there's a substantive communication happening in email and we're not capturing it, although we're not violating the letter of the Elections Code, we are violating the spirit of the Elections Code by not capturing those comments. And so that may also be something where we will want to reach into your email in order to get those substantive comments. And I want you to be very aware of that. You have opted to be a public official, but you may or may not have opted for us to go through your emails. And please, I don't want to go through your emails. Please don't make me do that. Okay, so we get to a pretty easy takeaway here, and that's that if you have used your personal email so far, because I know you are actively doing outreach, and I apologize that we're not providing this earlier in, I know, I got some eyebrows there. Those were appropriate eyebrows. And there's just so many balls in the air, right? Let us know. And what we'll do is we'll work through that with you to see, maybe go ahead and collect those emails. Know those are the ones that may be at issue. We will archive those emails that went out on RAC, and then we're done. And from here forward, you're going to make an informed decision on how you want to use that email account. But I will say, if you have sent emails that are only sharing the information in these 2 bullet points, 1, just the website, or 2, date, time, location, agenda, that kind of non-substantive information, then you're not going to give me a coronary, which is the goal. Let's not give Zoe a coronary. Okay, so those are kind of your email takeaways. Again, our goal is that this is at your fingertips, so you can just reach into your binder and find that email. All right, any questions on email? Okay. Okay. I like the way you think. I like.
Originally, we were replying all, people were saying, oh, I'm gonna be at the meeting, and I wouldn't even do that. I would make sure I went back to Glenn, and then Glenn would know. I mean, you shouldn't, and unless you're gonna, like I say, and then if you really want us to do anything, I would have expected to have our own, even a temporary email from the RAC. So you haven't done that, so you're not getting anything out of me.
If I had a gold star, I would give it to you. I might give you 2. And it's true. And these are some of the things that we're working through. And that said, our goal is absolutely outreach. And so now that we're really digging deep into this, we are looking at and considering whether we do want to create a RAC email. And what it can do is you can then have it forward to you. So I could have it could appear in my Yahoo mailbox. There are some, individuals may have different feelings about that, though, because you have your contacts in one. Are you able to send them out? All of those kinds of things. We certainly will consider it. That's above my pay scale in terms of creating that. But if that's something that you're interested in having because you think it will facilitate your ability to do effective outreach, which we do want you to do, then we'll talk to Glenn about that. But I do think as we go through this further, what we're also going to see is we want to see, how can you share from our Facebook page? Can you be sending out the website and those kinds of things and saying, go to this website to make the comment, that wouldn't be one that necessarily would be a responsive document from your email. But, you know, we can make the argument. Sometimes the question is they may still want it. So if you want RAC emails, we can talk about that and schedule it. I think there was some discussion of it, but there's.
Same thing with the Facebook. I mean, once we can like the Facebook page, I could see sharing that, you know, throughout, just, you know, as it comes out, just no different than I do for public meetings, even in Manteca or LAFCO or anything. But, right, anytime somebody responds, I would be.
And we're going to get into the Facebook thing. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Point of clarification, are we talking just the supervisor redistricting committee, or if you send out information regarding the state,
I love it. No, we're very much talking about your official capacity in the Supervisorial Redistricting Advisory Committee. And that's a great question. And we are often going to be navigating the fact that the county is doing two things. But your public official role is limited to the Supervisorial Redistricting. And in fact, what you're going to find is people are going to say, oh, they're going to ask you a question about redistricting. They're not going to differentiate potentially. And so you, as a public official on the supervisorial redistricting, I really like saying that word, supervisorial, it is really incumbent upon you to say, on the supervisorial side, go to, you know, this website. And also there will be a very clear, that website will give a clear button where you can get to the state information. We want you to have the state information, which is really just a referral. So, yeah. Yes.
So first of all, because I have started some, just check out the site, but I'm happy to meet with you, emails, I'll forward it to Glenn, but I would appreciate having some sort of an email, RAC official county blessed email to use in the event that there are further conversations. And I'm thrilled by this because I was uncomfortable actually sharing my personal email. Then the second is you talked about public meetings. If we go as an individual or a couple of members of this committee to meet with a group, does that need to be a public meeting that is then shared widely as available for anyone to drop into?
So we always want as much transparency as possible, but it's only a meeting if it's a majority. And so as long as you're not, right, so it really becomes a numbers, not a numbers game. Ooh, I have a soundtrack. I think I should have a soundtrack. Greg, can we look into that? So that's the difference there, is it is the number of people going. So absolutely. Exactly. And of course, we'll have ways to capture those comments, and that's where you want to work with Glenn to make sure we're capturing the comments and that you're doing that using the talking points. Exactly. All right. So that's kind of the emails, and now we're going to move on to social. Oh, go ahead, Chair.
Yes. First, I was surprised that you found my Teddy Bear 57 email.
Everything's on the internet.
Yeah, son of a gun. Could you please tell the commissioners how long that this material will be archived and you can go back and we're supposed to hang on to it?
Yes. One would think I could easily go to a single retention. I think what we will be doing is we will gather anything that you have and we will then archive it with our redistricting. And that is how we would respond in terms of Public Records Act requests too. I don't want to have you archive it so that we go back in 2 years, right? What I want to do is hold it. But one thing I am cognizant of, I was trying to be aware of, is that, okay, yeah, we could go back and get it if there's a CPRA. We also have staff resources to be aware of, so we don't want to be finding you and all of that. So that's why up to now we'll try and capture those. And from here forward, then we'll have very specific ways that we're going to do that. And it might be the RAC email, hopefully, is a good way to do that. Then we own that.
Okay.
And we can capture.
And then I like Ms. Ibeck would also like to have the email because I have a real problem. I did get hacked in my mayoral run and it was ugly. And people got into my email addresses and just, it was a bad thing.
That's a great point. So I think that's something that I will work with Glenn on, and then we'll make sure that we've got a clear path forward on getting what you have that might be responsive, and so that we never have to find out, you know.
Before Ms. Merle continues on, is there anyone that's online that has any questions? Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and move on to social media, which is a little bit of a different animal. The takeaway is very similar, but there's some information I want to make sure that you know. So the same concept is going to apply in terms of public records. And the same concept is going to apply in terms of the elections code substantive items that we'll want to capture. But there's a new wrinkle in terms of social media, and it really does, in a lot of ways, relate to the public forum idea. So we're going to kind of move through this, but essentially, prior to 2020, and really in part because of the 2017 City of San Jose, public officials rightly were sort of freaked out about using social media. There really was kind of a blanket, like a damp, whatever they say, wet blanket on public officials using it, even though it's a very powerful and beneficial tool for communication. So with that kind of concern in mind, AB 99, not so good with the numbers, there was a legislative act, 992, was adopted with the express goal of clarifying what actions public officials could or could not take in using their social media, with the idea not of limiting their use of social media, but in fact clarifying it and therefore encouraging it. Like so many laws, I'm not sure that it totally hits the mark. I know you'd be surprised by that. But that was its purpose. And so I want to go into it with you understanding the purpose of the law. So in September of 2020, the government code was substantively updated in terms of social media. So essentially, Assembly Bill 992 was drafted and passed, and that amended the Government Code's Brown Act. Very specifically, the Brown Act was amended in regards to social media. And that's what's really key here. That act states, and there's a link at the end of this, so you'll be able to just get right to AB 992, so you have that. It essentially states that public officials may use and communicate on social media to answer questions, provide information, to solicit information from the public on public business. However, remember, if it is your personal page and you do those things, you're potentially turning that personal page into a public forum. So public officials, and this is what's important, are prohibited from social media contacts between other commission members, regardless of number. So this is where we're moving away from that Brown Act idea of a meeting and a majority to a specific prohibition in the government code from one commission member commenting on another commission member's social media page. Now, you can go to Steve's page and comment on how adorable his new great-grandbaby is, but you can't go and if he's made a comment on redistricting, you can't go and comment on that. And there's some, and also if your page is a public forum, can you now go and comment even on the grandbaby page? And it's not clear because 992 is brand new. When laws come up that are new, there's of course a bajillion questions that have to be answered. So I want you to be slightly worried about this, okay? So that prohibition is specifically this: they are prohibited from responding, quote, directly to any communication on an internet-based social media platform. And then that's regarding any agency matter if the communication is made, posted, or shared by any member of the legislative body. This is more strict than in-person communication. So non-social media communication, 2 or even 3 members can discuss RAC business. 1 member cannot comment on one other member's social media post. So that's it. They really clamp down in an odd goal of encouraging social media use. Lawyers are weird. So I'm not sure they really encourage it, but that is what's happening here. It essentially, put it this way, it really is aiming to create a social media relationship between the public official and their constituents and allowing that, but avoiding any commenting on others' pages. That's really how I see how they envisioned it. So essentially, you don't get to do a thumbs up. You don't get to do an emoji. You don't get to post a cat meme. Don't do it. Okay? And in general, about the cat meme, just don't do it. So that is my life advice to you. Okay, you're welcome. I'm not even going to charge you for that. So this is where you will find this in your binder. This goes through what I just talked about, that in fact it is more strict, what it allows and what it prohibits. And this is your social media kind of takeaway, right? Is that I do want you to be a little bit nervous, but this is what you need to be aware of. If you opt to use your personal Facebook page, it's going to be potentially a public record. It's going to be potentially part of the supervisorial record. May create a public forum, in which case you cannot block people no matter how trolly they are. And of course, you run a very high risk of a potential Brown Act violation very inadvertently in a way that you don't have IRL in real life, okay? So where we wanted to go with this was, in looking at these things, we want your rules of procedure to guide you. We want them to be educational. We want them to help you. So in that sense, by being silent on social media, they weren't helping you very much. So what we've kind of opted to do is I am creating this rule, and let me just kind of summarize it for you. Essentially, what I have found is that it's a minefield for you to use your social media page. But if you opt to do it, do not post anything on the rack. But if you want to communicate on the rack in terms of getting information out, you can post the "We Draw the Lines" at sjgov.org, or you can post the date, time, and agenda of rack meetings. Here is where it gets dicey. People will comment, and that's concerning. So just be aware of that. But consistent with these kind of minefields and advice, I'm making the proposed addition of Section 20, and it essentially just says you shall not communicate on any internet-based social media platform, and that's how it's defined in AB 992, except to provide this information. Obviously, this is a limiting new rule of procedure. I gave you the training to say you can make informed decisions, but I am proposing that you as a body adopt this new rule, which would say that you shall not accept to post these items. And it defines communication. I think this is the right way to go in terms of your use of social media. We will have a county page. You can share that page, but again, you need to be very, very careful about when people comment, not engaging and not commenting on others' pages. So that's kind of where we've landed. I know it's a lot of information, but you have it in your binder. We weren't quite sure how deep to go into this, but they're pretty complicated ideas, and we all use our social media and our emails so much, it's second nature. So we just wanted to kind of give you that advice and then also propose this. So at this point, what I'm going to do is hand over to the chair whether you do want to take this up and have a discussion on the proposed revised rule of procedure. And alternatively, if you would like changes to this or somebody feels it's important to clarify this, certainly if that's the discussion and your rack direction or request from me, I'm happy to do that as well. This is a first run. So with that, I will answer any questions on the social media portion. And if there are no questions, I'll go ahead and hand it over to the chair.
Does anybody online have any questions? Anyone in the room have any questions? Use the microphone, please.
I think it's important to get some official emails, just because some people really do obviously want to make outreach, and why not make it easier on us? We don't want to be Brown Act experts, although we will be. And Zoe's great, but I think it'd be a lot easier if we just could cover our bases, keep everything organized. It's archived. We don't have to worry about it, and sooner rather than later. Because if the goal of this is outreach, then make it easy for us to outreach, so we aren't staying up at night wondering who we contacted, that type of thing. Not that I do. Haven't contacted anyone, just full disclosure. But anyway, I really think the sooner the better on that situation. I think it'd make it easier for everyone.
Excellent point. Anyone else? Yes, Ms. Starr.
Zoe, twice you've mentioned that if we follow the proposed new policy, and let's say that we post on there's going to be a meeting on August whatever, here's the location, et cetera. But then someone sends us a response email and they go on about this, that, and the other thing. My inclination would be not to answer that email, but should anything be done with that email? Because now we have a member of the public hanging out there thinking that
we're non-responsive?
That's a great question. I think what I would probably recommend that you do is that you have a very canned answer that says, please go to wedrawthelines.sjgov.org for more information and to provide your comment. And in fact, in our talking points, we might want to just put that. But that is a non-substantive comment where you're directing to the website. It meets our goal of getting the comment to us on the website, and it also, I think, protects you from, that's a non-substantive response from a public official. And I appreciate you being cognizant of, I don't want to give you advice that makes you look non-responsive. That's difficult in your position. I get it. So that's a really good question, and I think that's probably the best way to deal with it.
Excellent question. Because there's many times the questions do come up, and being non-responsive sends out the wrong message to the individuals, and they say, what are they doing? I'm asking a question and no one's responded to me. So good point. Anyone else? If not, let's bring the matter back to the group and let's have it. Is there any discussion on it? Any questions?
I believe that I would like to recommend, but I'm not making it a formal motion at this point, that we discuss adopting this revised rules of procedure.
Okay. Mr. Morwood?
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to get some clear understanding what's expected of us on the RAC. Like I say, I agree with the canned response. If we even share something and someone pops back on us, that's going to be dicey as well. So we should probably have something I could probably ask my daughter to make up some shortcut, by putting 2 letters in or something, but, because that way we get the same one every time, but, or maybe even my granddaughter. I think it's important that we answer something unfortunately I'm not able to answer that question, but you can direct it towards this. That way they don't think we're just being, because ignoring on Facebook is like a big taboo, you can't, if you don't like something, then it's assumed you don't like it. So, and we don't want to send out a wrong emoji, which, that's always dicey too. So I agree. It just would be nice to have maybe a little canned one-liner that we can use to direct whatever we decide on. So, thank you.
Yes, Ms. English? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very much. I go along with what we've been saying here. I echo the same sentiment. The only question, just clarification, is on the county page, when it comes closer to meeting in Stockton or in Tracy and Lodi, that we could share it on the city page. I would share the county page, making an announcement that we're going to be here, right? So if there's any questions, we could direct them to that site. Like if you have any questions, and it would be answered there. We don't have to make any comments. But we're sharing that we're meeting at Lodi or Stockton and Tracy. We could do that on, not my page, because I don't want to open a can of worms, but at the city page. There's a Facebook page that a lot of people follow when the meetings are going to be or events. So that's safe to do, correct? Or did I not?
I'm not 100% clear, but I think I understand. So our county page will share, we will be meeting in Tracy at this date, time, and location, and it will probably also always give the website. That website's also going to have the state congressional button, so that's going to give them a lot of information. You can absolutely share that, and you can actually individually post that on your page if you opt to do that. I'm not recommending that. Right. That would still be consistent with your rule of procedure if you opted to amend it to include the proposed section 20.
Okay.
And we will also, I think from a best practice standpoint, we will try and get it onto various city pages, and we're hoping that we have other jurisdictions and interest groups like the ones that have been contacted who will like our page, and so they'll get those notifications pushed out and they'll be seeing them. So we do hope to have that kind of synergy with other groups and groups of interest, so they are sharing those. And that actually lessens the burden on you as individual public officials to share them, if that's helpful.
Any other questions, comments? Do we wish to take action on this item? And if someone would, if so, move on the item?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to consider and vote on amendment to San Joaquin County Redistricting Advisory Committee Rules of Procedure. Any questions? Seeing none, proceed to vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose, same sign. And was that, was Ms. Panino, was that a affirmative?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So we will now move on to item number 9, redistricting criteria and discussion. Ms. Gabby Morales to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gabby Morales. I'm with the Redistricting Partners. I am the project analyst. I'm going to introduce to you Paul Mitchell. He is our lead demographer and our principal consultant. He's the owner of Redistricting Partners and the vice president of the bipartisan voter data firm Political Data Inc., PDI. Paul has conducted dozens of redistricting and racially polarized voting studies for local cities, school councils, and other agencies, and is a recognized expert in redistricting, demographics, elections analysis, and community electoral behavior. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Paul Mitchell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabby. And with the chair's approval, what I'll be doing is sharing my screen and going through the basic presentation that we'll be giving at all the outreach meetings. It'll give you a chance to see a lot of this information again, to hear it again, and also for you to see what kind of baseline information members of the public are going to receive. That will end with me giving a demonstration of District R, which is a mapping tool that the county will be using for public engagement, and then answering any questions that you might have. But this presentation is actually the August 17th presentation that I'll just be walking you through. If that's okay with the chair, I'll just go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, sir. Continue on.
Great, thanks. So the San Joaquin County Redistricting Advisory Committee will be holding a series of outreach workshops. And this presentation is built upon much of the same information you received before. But it starts off just welcoming people to the meetings and going over the things we're going to cover. Traditional redistricting principles and the basics of redistricting. What is a community of interest? Because that's a lot of the reason why we want these outreach hearings. A demonstration of the mapping tool. And then we will have an opportunity then for members of the public to give public input. And then we'll go over the actual hearing schedule. So redistricting, as we've discussed, and we need the public to understand this too, is primarily a process of rebalancing existing lines in order to adjust, based on every decennial census, the population to create both fair representation and equal voting power for all constituents. These are two simultaneous things that we're trying to do in the redistricting process. And they are constitutional guarantees both to equal representation and to voting rights. The county supervisors are going through this process. As you heard earlier in another presentation, there's the same process happening in Congress and the legislature. And then local cities, school boards, community college districts. Any government in the state or in the country that has districts is going to have to go through this process every 10 years. The 7-member RAC that was created was really given the primary task of conducting outreach to the community and to utilize that input, which will come really in 3 formats that I'll go over: the verbal input, written input, and mapping input, to identify what those communities of interest are that should be the building blocks of districts. And then to create a set of draft maps based on that input, and to recommend one of those maps to the County Board of Supervisors to be their redistricting plan for the coming decade. The timeline that we're under is essentially these early public workshops and then the release of census data. It's noteworthy that this used to be kind of in the opposite order in the past. Usually we would get the census data by March and then be doing a lot more of the public workshops after the data is already out. Because of the late census data, it's been moved a little bit. And we do get questions from people saying, well, what are we supposed to be doing when we don't have the data yet? The work we're doing in identifying communities of interest really isn't determined by census data. If somebody is a member of a community, a neighborhood, they go to the school they go to, and they walk to the coffee shop they walk to, and they go to the dog park that they go to, whether or not that's 2,000 people, 6,000 people, or 8,000 people doesn't really determine how strongly they feel about their community and the need for that community to be represented. So we will get final census data, but this community of interest testimony can still happen first. After we have that census data, there will be additional public meetings, and then the creation of draft maps, and then a final plan that will be adopted by December 7th by the county supervisors. So the principles that we use in redistricting, there's these 5 and some more in state law, but these are the ones that really are primary in how we draw lines. The most important of these really is this community of interest. So we can talk about, if people have questions about why districts need to be equal sized or why they need to be contiguous, we can talk about the principles of following cities and counties, or about how we define compactness, but really getting at this community of interest piece is the most critical part for these outreach hearings. So people ask, what is a community of interest? It really is subjective. And we want to hear from the public about their community of interest, and there are no right and wrong answers. We want to hear from everybody in the community in order to get a sense of the largest set of potential communities of interest for you to use as building blocks for potential districts. There are some communities of interest that are given a kind of a primary role in the redistricting process. The communities covered by the Voting Rights Act in California, it's largely Latinos, Asians, and African Americans, but it could also be in some parts of the state, different populations, Chaldeans or Armenians. In some states, the Native American populations can be covered by the Voting Rights Act. We're doing some work in Alaska, and their Alaska Natives are covered by the Voting Rights Act. So there are these different populations, but there's a catch with drawing districts following the Voting Rights Act, but also not using race as the predominant factor for drawing districts. If there is a situation where there's a need to draw a majority-minority district in order to qualify as a Section 2 protected district for some population or group, you can use race as more of a factor in how you draw those districts. But excluding that one situation that an attorney has told you you're required to draw a certain district a certain way, then the rest of the districts can only be drawn based on community of interest testimony and data around keeping communities together. When we look at the types of communities of interest that could be utilized, it is really broad. And this is just a short list of the types of communities. It could be, I mentioned dog parks, so it could be those, or outdoor recreation areas. It could be homeowners versus renters. It could be rural versus urban. It could be looking at, people's media markets, how they get information, where their newspaper subscriptions are. We've even seen people talk about what sports teams they align with. So communities of interest can be a number of different things. The things they cannot be a relationship to a political party. They can't be a relationship to an incumbent or a relationship to a political candidate. So if somebody comes up and says, hey, I'd love for this community of interest to be together because it's my families and friends and I'm going to run for county supervisor, then that isn't something that would be a legitimate community of interest. If somebody walks up and says, I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party and you need to draw a district this way to allow a Libertarian to get elected, that also couldn't be considered. But outside of those exclusions, basically it's open season on what people want to help define as a community of interest. Now, just because there's a community of interest doesn't always mean that it can relate well to the redistricting process. let's say somebody said their community of interest is people who root for the A's. Well, people who root for the A's is probably not very geographically fixed. It might be all over the county. And so that might not be a community that can be kind of narrowly defined within the redistricting process. So we want to identify communities of interest that have, a real set of different things that can come together to define them specifically for the redistricting process. One of them is, what is the community? I talked about renters or homeowners or people with some attribute that makes them different. What is that community, and how do you define that community as a member of the public? Then how is that community geographically identified? What's its footprint? In an exercise where we're ultimately going to be trying to follow state law and protect those communities of interest and allow them to be in one district in a way to maximize their political representation, where is it? So we want to know from the public that where. And then the third thing we want to know is, it's kind of a why question. It's, why is this community of interest something that should be really considered by the county supervisors? If somebody says their community of interest is that they oppose the war in the Middle East, the county supervisors aren't probably making decisions about that. So that might not have as much relevance to county supervisors. But if they said that they are in a neighborhood without sidewalks, or they're in an unincorporated part of a city that relies on county services, then that does relate directly to the work of the county. So when you're developing your ear for communities of interest, you're going to want to think about these three things when people come and testify. Oftentimes people check these three boxes without even realizing it. They'll say, I'm a student and we live over near the campus, and without the county services, we wouldn't be able to have access to transportation to get to school. In those two sentences, they literally just checked off all three of those boxes. But if somebody does come up and says, I'm with the Chaldean population, thank you very much for considering us, then you probably do want to ask, excuse me, where can you define where the Chaldean community is in the county? Are there certain ways in which the Chaldean community needs services from the county in order to, a way to express its representative power? Are there issues that the Chaldean community feels aren't being addressed? And those kind of things will help strengthen them as a community of interest in the redistricting process. So I'm going to go through some examples of potential communities of interest. We do this for the public meeting in order to kind of like try to spark the conversation. So I won't ask you to raise your hands and participate, but usually we create this as a little bit of a back and forth, a little bit of a game for people. So a group of renters who live in downtown Stockton testifies to the county's redistricting commission. Is this a community of interest? Well, yes, it's a community of interest that I have already described in our presentation earlier. They might share certain traits. They probably have a certain footprint. In fact, the American Community Survey of the Census does define where areas are of homeowners and renters, and we can bring those up in maps. And there are, policy of the county that will impact renters differently than homeowners. So a historically recognized town that has not a lot of population but still exists in the county, should that be prioritized in the redistricting process? And the answer to that one is also yes. The state law recognizes historical communities as communities of interest when drawing maps. So even if you say, well, that doesn't really have a lot of population, or I've never met anybody from there, still doesn't mean that that shouldn't be recognized. And in some ways, historical communities, even of large existing current communities, can be recognized. So if there's a part of town that was previously like a redlined part of town, or a part of town that was historically the Black community, then that might have some cultural significance in the redistricting process and can be considered. A group of almond and walnut farmers in the rural unincorporated areas focused on ensuring they have enough water for their orchards. Would that be a community of interest? Well, the answer is yes. They have geographic location. They have a need for public services, but there is kind of maybe an asterisk there. They might be great to have testify at the county board, but you might also want to tell them to go to their water district, to have their water district engaged in and be engaged in that redistricting as well. We've actually had experience with almond farmers and walnut farmers in local water district redistricting in the past. And I think this might be the last one, but a statewide group of fans who are fans of the Giants. I already said that fans of the A's aren't necessarily a community of interest, so presumably fans of the Giants aren't either. And the fact is that that is a group that probably isn't kind of geolocated into one part of the county, and it's unlikely that the County Board of Supervisors has a lot to do with a sports franchise unless they're moving a team to town and building a stadium and there's county dollars going into it and need for transportation and concerns about crime or whatever else is going on with the development of a new county facility, then it would be a community of interest. I mentioned earlier that there are multiple ways in which we're getting the public engagement. And one of the ways is through the website. The website is going to be a source for all of the meetings, videos of this hearing and documents, this presentation. Everything's going to be on the website. It's going to be hosted on that website for actually for 10 years. So we will in 2030 have commissioners like yourselves be able to look back at the prior redistricting and see what decisions were made back then. The website will have a community of interest form that will allow for the public to fill out and kind of answer those key questions about what is their community of interest. And that's going to be a critical part of us developing testimony, because not everybody's going to want to testify in a live hearing, or not everybody's going to want to submit their community of interest kind of on a mapping tool. So having that as a method is going to be really important. Let me go to the next. The other kinds of online map submissions that we're going to receive will be community of interest maps that will be people drawing their area, and I'll show that on the District R tool, and also full plans once those data are released. Right now, the San Joaquin is going to be using a program called Districtor, and that program is being set up for you right now, but I'm going to show, just so people have a sense of what it looks like, what Districtor looks like, and I'm going to change what I'm sharing right now to do that. And then I'll come back to the PowerPoint. So this is a program called Districtor, and this program allows for anybody, and this is the statewide version, it allows for anybody to go to a part of the state and draw districts in order to, in this instance, draw districts for the legislature, but the tool is going to be the same. And it is a very user-friendly, easy program with a couple key functions. One is it has this little paintbrush function. You select a paintbrush, and you can select if you want it to be a really narrow paintbrush that just draws like one little census block at a time, or you can make it a really wide paintbrush that draws like huge areas all at once. You also have an eraser tool that I can go ahead and erase that. And as you're doing this, you can, let's take a moderate sized paintbrush. You can draw areas. So you could say, I have an area that's my community of interest that is the southern part of Lodi. And you could draw that area. And on the tool that we have for the county that is going to be launched, you'll be able to name that community of interest, save it, and send it into the county. So it's a really simple, easy paintbrush, and then name it and send it. If you needed to do more than one, so let's say that southern Lodi is where you live, but you are involved in agriculture and there's another community of interest, and you think that this area out here should all be drawn in one district, and it's a known area that should be protected, you could create a second community of interest and draw that. So this tool allows real easy kind of painting of areas, naming them, and sending them in to be considered by the commission. Now, It also will allow us to use this for the drawing of districts. When it comes time and when we have the final data in, members of the public will be able to come in and do the same functions, but draw their county supervisor districts however they see fit. And as they're drawing them, they'll be able to see the population of those districts and then draw the next one. You can lock your districts so that now I'm not overriding the one I already created. And you can go ahead and draw districts. And this drawing of districts will allow them to create a full redistricting plan. And then once they've created that full redistricting plan, they'll be able to save it. They'll be able to send it into the county and have this be one of the redistricting plans that will be reviewed by the commission prior to the commission selecting draft maps and then going through that process that I mentioned in the PowerPoint. To get back to the PowerPoint, so the districtor will not only get posted up shortly with all the San Joaquin specific information in the community of interest tool, but we'll also at the same time have a video that will get posted that will have Sophia Garcia, who's our outreach director, going through what the online tool is for, how to use it, going through a demonstration, and then finishing up with some more information about how to go to the county's redistricting website to fill out a community of interest form, to learn about other hearings, to be involved in the process. So both of those will be coming very soon. The third way, so we have community interest, we have the community of interest forms, we have the verbal testimony at committee meetings, we have the online mapping tool, but we do have one other version of the mapping tool, which will be a printed map. We have these here for different jurisdictions. They're like a laminated map that you can draw on with a dry erase marker. And we'll have those for the county as well, so that when we do transition to in-person meetings and want to do any in-person map drawing, that we'll have a tool for the county and the RAC to use. The schedule that we have, and I apologize if this slide presentation there might be updates happening right now to each of these meetings and their locations. But it looks as though we've got the two hearings, August 17th and September 15th, that are going to be happening prior to the release of the final data set. Then after the 23rd, which is when we expect to have the final census data available, then we'll be able to have additional workshop on the 29th. And then on October 13th and 27th, those are the real opportunities for the RAC to, dive into the community of interest testimony that's been provided, look at the maps that have been created, and start to develop their own draft maps. Now, one of the things that we'll review with you is the process essentially of between that meeting on the 29th and the meeting on the 13th, how do we get here from there? How do we make that leap from being a commission that is trying to listen and trying to solicit input to one that's actually now going to have to do the drafting of maps? And in that document we'll be putting together for you, we'll give some suggestions about how to essentially review those draft maps. We'll help you with some objective analysis of the maps that have been drawn by the public, help you potentially elevate some of those publicly drawn maps to become your own draft maps, have a process for amending any maps. So if you put out a draft map and we come back to another hearing on the 27th and the public has said, well, we want to do this with Stockton, we want to do this with the rural areas, that you can have a process for making changes to the maps that you put together. But ultimately, the goal is to get to that final map that will be provided to the county supervisors. So the San Joaquin Redistricting website will always remind the public of this. We draw the lines.sjgov.org. So it's a great opportunity for the public to be able to real quickly get all this information, watch old hearings, get access to the mapping tools, get access to the community of interest forms, and learn about upcoming hearings. And with that, I will go ahead and stop the presentation, and I'm happy to get any feedback from you, both from the mindset of any questions you might have about the process as we described it, and also any questions you might have or suggestions you might have for how this presentation can be provided to the public in those outreach hearings.
Mr. Mitchell, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Do we have any questions from anyone online? Just none at this time. How about in-house? Do we have any questions? Mr. Mooney?
Yeah, I was just wondering when, if we go to that district or program now, will it populate population numbers in it now, or will that have to wait till they get the firm numbers from the census?
Yeah, they will have numbers. If I had gone into a couple of different tabs there, it would have shown the numbers. We'll work with you, but presumably we would put the current estimated data in there from the American Community Survey as the total population numbers. We can also put in the 2010 census data. Neither of those are final numbers, and we want to be really careful about when we're encouraging people right now to draw communities of interest. The numbers aren't as important, but when we're actually telling people to draw districts and to balance them with that 10% buffer, then we really do want to make sure that that's being encouraged once that finals data is in. So we'll probably transition our messaging. Prior to data release, we're going to talk about people hopefully drawing communities of interest and submitting those. And after the data is released, we're going to have to be really, really aggressive for that couple weeks after the data is released and before your draft map hearing to try to get the public to submit their own complete draft maps. And we'll accept, obviously, any proposed individual draft maps if somebody just wants to draw their district. We will receive maps regardless of how well they're drawn, because everybody's input should be viewed equally. But getting several sets of complete draft maps will really help inform the commission about what parts of the county do all the draft maps look similar, like certain parts of the county maybe aren't that controversial as to how they should be drawn, and other parts of the county you might see, very strong feelings people have about how to draw parts of the lines. So getting that period from the release of the data September 23rd to that October 13th first hearing on draft maps, we probably have, right there, we have roughly 3 weeks. And the first 2 of those 3 weeks, from the 23rd till about October 6th or so, that period is probably the most important period for getting people to draw draft maps, because they can draw draft maps, have them turned in, and we can have those analyzed and turned around to you prior to your meeting on October 13th.
Oh, this is Pam Ibeck. Great presentation, and I'm very impressed by your approach to engaging the community. It should be fabulous. I've got one comment and then 2 questions. My comment is very small. On your San Joaquin County redistricting timeline page of the presentation on September 29th, that RAC outreach workshop is listed as number 2. It's actually number 3.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So first question, can an individual person come up to these workshops or online and declare that there should be this community of interest by themselves? Or do they really need to have a collective group or be a representative of a collective group before they try to create a community of interest?
I think all of those modes are totally acceptable. If somebody wants to come up, if I want to go to my county redistricting meeting and say I'm a cyclist and I need these roads are always have potholes, and I have a bunch of friends but they're too busy to come, but I can come and be expressing a community of interest and kind of trying to shine a light for the commission on what my community of interest is. It's also possible, in another redistricting, we had this recently, where somebody got up in a presentation just before ours and said that he was the president of the bike club. And so in that instance, he was trying to represent an actual organization, trying to speak as though he was speaking for 150 people, not just himself. And then the third kind of thing can happen where you can have organizations or coalitions of organizations come forward. Maybe they want to present a draft plan, or they want to have like a more involved engagement. All of those things are fine. And you really probably want to think of it as being kind of agnostic to, what type of group or individual is coming forward, and try to encourage as much input as possible. And then when we're in the line drawing process and we're in the map evaluation process, that's where you as commissioners are going to be weighing the importance of that criteria. And maybe the one guy who said like he really wants to be in the same district as his 7-Eleven, maybe you say, well, that doesn't end up being as important as this other community that came before us and had a real coalition behind them.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that explanation. It's very helpful.
Great.
So now my next question is really for our county staff. Were community of interest collected in the last redistricting effort? And so are you going to be able to come forward and say, hey, here's the 43 COIs that were considered last time? And if so, should we be considering them this time?
During the last process, we did hold community meetings and seek input. We didn't use quite the same terminology, but those were factored in, and we also allowed the public to come in and work with staff to define their own scenarios. So whatever their issues were that were around those communities were reflected in their plans. The laws were different then and the lingo was different, but we did encourage the public to submit their ideas. It might be interesting to see some of the plans that were submitted. If you're interested, the issues may have changed since then. So I would caution against distracting you, so to speak.
I have a question, and this also goes back to staff, and I apologize because I should have picked this up earlier, but I'm looking at the meeting dates of August 17th, September 15th, and then again on the 29th. But my question comes about the times of the meetings, 5:30 to 7:30, 3 to 5, and 4 to 6. It would seem to me that if we're wanting to have transparency and we want to get as many people to those meetings and participating, that we may have taken a look at these hours of the meetings and allowed for people who may be coming from work, whatever the case might be. I think the first one, 5:30 to 7:30, I think we're good. But the 3 to 5 at Tracy and even the 4 to 6 at Lodi seems to be, we may want to relook at those hours. That's just my opinion. And I would look for other people's opinion on the matter also.
Hi, Chair. So yeah, we had extensive discussion on this, and we were looking at it from a countywide perspective. So not, for example, Tracy specific or Lodi specific. So we were trying to accommodate all of the residents countywide. So some could attend during the day at 3 to 5. Others, we intentionally went past 5, so the 4 to 6 window. And then we specifically had the evening opportunity here on the 17th. So that was kind of the logic that went into it.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Baird?
I sort of agree with you, Steve. On the one hand, I think that having them all at the same time is a good idea. The other point is, even if you say, okay, we're going to have an early one for people who want to come during the day, if you have it out in Lodi, the Tracy people aren't going to come probably.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
I put on too many meetings working with farmers and trying to get people to come to a daytime meeting, and that just didn't happen.
I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah.
So Chair, yeah, we are fortunate that we have Zoom at all of these meetings. No, intentionally for that reason, because we really do want to give everybody the opportunity to engage. So yeah, we went round and round trying to figure out the best combination. We were very mindful of this, but we appreciate you
Okay, I like
sharing that.
That's
same.
true. I like the Zoom idea. You can just jump on your As long as we publicize it well enough, then that's good.
And we will be.
I agree with, Steve. And the reason for that is, the city of Tracy would probably maybe be Mountain House, maybe, Lathrop, I don't know, because of the commute time. That's one of the biggest gripes that right now, not just the city of Tracy, but many people, is that why they're having it this time. We're commuting. Even if you have it as Zoom, those people that are commuting, they're not going to be able to be on Zoom while they're driving. And that to me is a big concern. I mean, I appreciate the Zoom because, you know, with COVID, a lot of people still don't want to go to meetings. But at the same time, if we're going to have this on Zoom, 3 to 5, speaking as a grandmother and a mother, 4 o'clock, maybe sometimes even 5 o'clock, people are starting to make dinner for the families. And if we want to be transparent, I mean, that's just, I agree with Steve. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? It could be either way. But, I mean, that's just my opinion. The 5:30 to 7:30, if we give enough notice to the public, people in Tracy and Mountain House and Lathrop possibly could join that meeting. That's, it's catch-22.
Mr. Morwitt?
Yeah, I was actually to chime in right from the beginning. I agree with all of you, actually. I appreciate the county's efforts and as a sitting around and deciding on their own. I think that's great. But I think we have a responsibility as being on the advisory committee to actually, sounds to me, we're looking for some type of a motion or something to change what's been decided. And it's important that, because we are from the community and we were asked to be on this, that, convenient wise, it doesn't make sense to me to do it in Zoom. Like you said, it's great, except when you're driving, it doesn't work so well. So while I applaud your meetings that you've done prior to us coming here today, I feel like we have an obligation to our community, our communities and as a large, because we're not just working for our own districts. I think we're working for the entire county, that we should make some changes. And we brought this up at the last meeting as well. And like I said, I appreciate what you had done prior to us coming on, but it doesn't make sense for an area that's growing. And the reason it's growing, folks, is because we come from everybody's coming from the Bay Area. That is really the main reason we're growing. Let's face it, sure, people are moving around a little bit within the inner counties. But realistically, people are moving from the Bay Area and they're still commuting because they're looking for affordable housing. That is probably the overwhelming reason that we're growing as much as we are. So I would be in favor of changing times. I'm not so sure about the dates. I'm not saying that's an issue, but I do think the times need to be coordinated where more people can be involved. And that includes, like she said, like Alice said, coming from a Zoom situation as well. Thank you.
Mr. Fowler?
So the logic behind this, again, it's a county-wide outreach effort. So when you're looking at the Tracy opportunity, it won't specifically be limited to just talking about Tracy, nor will the Lodi outreach effort, nor will the Stockton outreach effort. So these are just 3 opportunities for people to convene and hopefully participate in our outreach meetings. So that's really what we're trying to do here. One happens to be in Lodi, one happens to be in Tracy, one happens to be in Stockton, but that is not going to limit our agenda or discussion when it comes to redistricting. So just to kind of clarify.
I do not think that the point is actually looking at whether it's changing redistricting. I think what we're trying to really say is the fact that you want transparency, you want to get as many people that's going to participate at the meetings. I think these are the things that we really need to look at. Mr. Kwong.
So Chair, I'm getting a sense and hearing the words that there might be a motion to change these times. I want to point out one more thing first. So thankfully, Mo reminded me of this schedule we put out. These are the outreach workshops. We're going to have 3 actual RAC meetings that are all in the evening. So on October 13th, October 27th, and November 10th, they're all 6 to 8 p.m. So those will be falling in the next 2 months after August and September. Obviously, you folks have, besides these training sessions, by the time you're done, you're going to have probably like 10 meetings all in about six months. I did want to remind you about those additional opportunities. Now, that said, with my original comments and my sense of where you're headed, if you want to do these outreach workshops in the evening entirely, we would have to figure out the logistics of it again. So we would have to figure out whether the Tracy City Hall and the Lodi Square, Hutchins Street, which I've been to, but I can't say, number of times. But we would have to see if they're actually available, because we're working with a lot of the actually owners and the cities to do that. But if that's the direction that the committee wants us to do, go forward, we would do so. But we would find, if these places aren't available, find other logistics in addition to the folks that we work with at Redistricting Partners and stuff like that. So just for you to consider.
Thank you very much. Was there any comments from online from that discussion? Any other comments? And then first, let me go to Mo first.
Had said as well, thank you. So the law requires 4 outreach meetings, and like David said, we have, I believe it's about 9 or 10 total. So we absolutely want to reach as many people as we can. And so we try to balance out these different times, which is why you see some that are up front more afternoon to early evening, and then there are these other 3 that are just straight evening, 6 to 8 p.m. to capture exactly what you're discussing, those commuters that are coming in. So when this was crafted, it was crafted with that in mind, because we are almost a commuter county where the majority of our citizens, they do commute. And I just wanted to point out that our meeting count is above and beyond what the law is requiring from us. So while the law requires 4, we're at, I believe it's 9 or 10, what that number is. And then of course, if there's anybody that also says, hey, we want to do this, what I would encourage is, rather than amend these meeting times, we add a meeting as we see the need, because we also have flyers ready to go. We've already advertised these meeting dates too. So not an impossible barrier to, change, but there are some logistics involved. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's right.
May I comment?
Yes, ma'am.
And thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I also apologize looking at this, but because of COVID and so much things has changed, I still have a problem with the workshop, not necessarily in Tracy because it involves San Joaquin County, is now that they've gotten the okay to go back to school, the 3 to 5, the people that are commuting and parents that have to pick up the kids from school and make dinner, because again, I just, hopefully we get a good input that day, but 3 to 5 kids are being picked up from school now. We're going back to school in August, correct? And I would love to see transparency and a lot of input, but I think this time here, and again, I appreciate all the work because I know what it does. Logistics is a lot of planning, and I apologize. But now that things keep changing, the school's opening up and people are going to commute, I would love to see more community input. But I just think that time right now, I mean, things could change in 2 weeks, right? But because of the schools and people commuting, that might not help. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I don't see that time.
So for some professional groups, it's an interesting thought process in terms of, because it's above and beyond, maybe interesting to consider that if somebody's representing an interest group, that's actually their 8 to 5 job. But all of the input's interesting, and so that is not a counter, but just an addition.
Ms. Baird, and then we'll come back to.
Now that I understand the whole picture, which I didn't see before, I'm fine with the way things are.
So I'd like to make a motion that the staff seek to add a second evening outreach workshop. So that would be either changing workshop 2 or 3 to be in the evening, depending on logistics, or if that's not possible, to add a 4th workshop that's in the evening. The reason I'm suggesting the 4th workshop, I'm sorry, I'm discussing my own motion. But the reason I'm suggesting a 4th workshop, although goodness gracious, all of us are busy and we don't want to do a 4th, is that the RAC meetings that are in the evening I'm presuming will not include the very helpful background and PowerPoint presentation that we just saw that is very informative to the public.
Okay. Is there any questions of the motion before I, yes, ma'am? Say again, please.
So with that motion, if the RAC committee could please decide which location they would like to have that evening. Because of our county, we can either, throughout the county, there's different cities. So we're trying to capture different parts of the county. So if the RAC could also include the location of that meeting. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I understand your motion 100%. I just would like to know, are you saying basically, would you prefer to have it come after everybody's explained their reasoning, have a later meeting, and if that's not possible, then add an additional meeting? Is that what you're saying? Or do you still want an additional meeting regardless of what happens with the?
My motion is meant to say first choice, change one of the workshops that are earlier to be later. 5:30 to 7, 6 to 8. If that's not logistically possible, to add a 4th workshop that would be in the evening.
Okay, so then would that be better to bring back to someone to see if that's possible before we do that motion? Because adding another meeting, like I say, that is, now you've really brought in completely different logistics, and then we'll have to make sure we're available. And we've kind of all, I think, put on our calendars to make sure with work and things. So I don't know who that would go to. What would be, would that be something to carry over to the next meeting or sometime, or?
Well, the next meeting is the 17th, and if there is going to be a change, it has to be done today.
Your opportunity, Dave.
Thank you, committee members. So I think that's part of the overall logistics. These are happening so fast. These meetings are basically every 2 weeks or 3 weeks in between. So the logistics include calling these cities and not necessarily getting a response in a day or two. And then they have to figure out with their folks whether they can get the facilities for us. So in addition to that, we're doing advertisements and all kinds of stuff. So we're starting to expand resources on those efforts too. So I guess the way where we're at is what we can do is just try and reach out tomorrow and see if we can change the Tracy one from 3 to 5 to 5:30 to 7.
Before we go there, can I just, Mr. Hernandez, did you have a question?
I understand the differences in the locations and the times and everything, but I really don't think that there's going to be a good time for everybody to attend. I think what you're doing by having multiple times and multiple locations, that if somebody wants to show up, they are going to make, they're really going to make the effort with the different times and the different locations. I don't think that by us adding another meeting or by us adjusting one or the other is going to do anything different or bring any more people in. People work, they have a life. If they see multiple times, they'll know which one that they they can attend. If they can't attend, then they'll probably send a representative to go and represent, their community of interest, if that's what it's meant to be. But I don't see a good time for everybody that wants to show up, because working people, looking at the times, we're neglecting the people that work nights, the people that work swing shift. We don't have any morning times on here. We don't have late nights. We don't have a weekend on here. So, we're excluding somebody from what we have now. And if we adjust the times, we're still going to be excluding some people.
Excellent point.
And Zoom is available no matter what, correct?
Right.
I think we're covering our bases.
Ms. Merrill?
Mo was just reviewing, and she has a good suggestion that would add an evening time because it's in our chambers. But she's talking, so I'm going to just keep talking, and then I'm going to just the meeting that is Tuesday, August 17th is Mo's idea. Are you ready?
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Zoe. So if the RAC decides to move forward with an evening, I think in looking at the schedule here in the board chambers, currently we have one meeting scheduled 5:30 to 7:30, and I think this would be less of an impact to everybody if they've already had their schedules planned for this evening, including the consultants and people that are attending outside of who's in this room. We could push that to 6 to 8 p.m. and that would be here at the board chambers, so we know that that would be available. With each meeting, there's also the state redistricting outreach meetings tacked onto each one too. So keeping in mind and looking at the schedule, I think that if the RAC so pleases, would capture the evening audience, and it's here at the board chambers, which people are pretty familiar with, and we would make sure to send that out as much as we can too. So just something to consider.
Okay.
Either ahead or right after.
Yeah. You want to rescind your motion? Okay. No.
I'm sorry, Chair, and people are listening to Zoom. Well, I think that we should just stay with this. And, I respect Pamela's input on that, but having a fourth meeting is actually playing it pretty close too, right? So I think we just gonna have to do what we can, and we have to do our due diligence in reaching out to the public.
And I rescind my motion after hearing the further discussion. Thank you.
Spirited debate. Yes, sir.
And just additional information for what it's worth. So this morning's meeting, which was very well attended on the state redistricting effort, we had 20 plus, maybe as many as 25. So just letting you know, so back to Esau's point, I think those who are interested are going to make the effort regardless of the time. So just sharing that.
Okay. So the motion has been rescinded, and so is there any other questions, any comments?
Yeah, quick question.
Yes, Mr. Grunsky.
Yes, James Grunsky, District 3. Zoom will be available to the committee members as well, correct? For those outreach programs?
That's correct.
Okay, as well. Just I'm in trucking season, so it varies on nights availability, but I could always make a Zoom.
Okay. Ms. Starr, did you have a question, comment?
Actually, I have a comment on the presentation, and this is probably more for the consultant. And so if, as an alternate, if it looks like I'm getting too far out of line, please just let me know. But I sat and viewed the presentation, which was very good, from a public member's viewpoint, because I'm assuming that this is what is going to be presented to the public at the outreach meetings regularly. So it would be at each one of the meetings. And I saw it in, first of all, my comments are in two sections. One is just structural, and
looking at the slides, I found them hard to read. And particularly if you've got a room full of people and they're sitting back in the chambers about 5 rows, they might have difficulty reading some of the lines, even though the presentation is going through them. And the contrast of the color, I think, is one of the issues. And related to that, and this is very picky, but some people are colorblind, and sometimes that green color just sort of fades off into kind of a yellow color, making it that much more difficult to see. So I wouldn't want something that people are looking at to start to turn them off or cause them to not pay as much attention. And the slide number 6 on the timeline, that one is, well, really hard to read. And I recognize that you just have to walk through it. Now, related to all of that, would these slides then be available on the website? So if somebody wanted to go back and review them, they could do that.
They'll be there tomorrow.
They will be.
And I'm thinking. I'm thinking about the public. So if they come to one of the meetings and they want to come back and look at something, they can. The second comment that I have relative to the slides is it's really good summary going into what's the redistricting. It talks about the committee and gives a timeline, and then gives the redistricting principles, which all fit to kind of an overview. But then the rest of the slides go into communities of interest. And I felt like there wasn't a strong enough transition that really let the public know that, okay, now we're going to talk about how you can participate in this concept of communities of interest, and that all of these other pieces of information, like filling out the form and identifying do you meet the criteria, et cetera. So I just felt like it just needed a little more transition, that we're really inviting the public to be part of the process at that point.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, you had a comment?
Oh, I think that's great input. We have been doing a lot of these, and I think sometimes we need a fresh set of eyes to give us some thoughts on it. And I think especially that idea when we're doing the community of interest portion, we can transition to like here's the part for you really to be engaged and emphasize that. And I'll look at the palette that we're using for the colors on the presentation. I know that we take a lot of make a lot of focus on our actual maps that we'll end up producing, making sure that the maps are using a colorblind acceptable palette. But I guess I haven't thought about the color of the text on the slide, so we can take a look at that. So I just appreciate that input, and the presentations and this meeting and that very question are all going to be housed on the county's website for the next 10 years. So definitely all this information will be available for the public.
Thank you.
Careful what you ask, but in 10 years, somebody's going to be watching this.
Ms. Merrill?
The chair, if I may, just make one comment that I really love the robust discussion. And in fact, I love to see commissions working exactly how they are designed. I would just note in terms of the involvement in alternates, completely welcomed and obviously valuable. In terms of the training, remember when we get into the regular commission meetings, the roles of the alternates will shift and their participation will shift. So we all just want to be aware of that. So definitely want those comments, but I just wanted to flag that as we move from training into the regular meetings. So
thank you. Okay, so any other discussion on the item? I want to go back number 9 just for clarity. Who's going to handle that redistricting criteria discussion?
Yeah, so Paul, we had discussion about having redistricting partners just do a little bit of a deeper dive regarding total deviation and specific to San Joaquin County. So if you could, that'd be appreciated.
Absolutely. I knew that was coming. I didn't recognize that was the item we were on. So so the state law requires that the county utilize a maximum of 10% total deviation in its redistricting plan. And so what that means is that each district, we'll talk about each district having its own deviation. So if a district is supposed to be 80,000 and it's 82,000, then its deviation is that 2,000 number. We'll also talk about it in a percentage. So if it was a district supposed to be 100,000 and it's 105,000, we'll say that it's 5% overpopulated. If it's 95,000, we'll say that it's 5% underpopulated. So the deviation of a district is how far away it is from the ideal population. The total deviation of a redistricting plan is the difference between the largest district and the smallest district. And that is the 10% deviation rule. And it should be clear that a lot of people use a shorthand for that and say, oh, the largest district has to be no more than 5% over, and the smallest district has to be no more than 5% under. That is a 10% deviation, but the law doesn't limit you just to that. You could have a situation where one of your districts is 8% over, and the other 4 districts are all 2% under. That would be a perfectly balanced plan, and the total deviation would be 10 percentage points. And that deviation total range can be utilized for a few different things. One is, let's say you're going down the process of drawing districts and you realize that if you want to keep a certain city whole, that district is going to end up being 6% overpopulated. Well, can you find other places in the plan to adjust so that other districts are underpopulated? You have a balanced plan and you can stay within that total 10% deviation. There could also be instances where, and this is something a lot of redistrictings are looking at, in Butte County, the city of Paradise, we know, was 26,000 people prior to the fires. It is trying to rebound, it's trying to rebuild, but right now the total population in the census is projected probably to be around 5,000 people. So if that's the case, do they want to use that 10% buffer to essentially underpopulate the district that's going to have the city of Paradise to account for the fact that it's going to rebuild over the next coming, 6 or 8 or 10 years? In other instances, they're looking at that buffer and they're saying, well, we believe that the student population is going to be uncounted at the student housing at the college. So maybe we're going to use that 10% buffer to adjust for that expected imbalance in the census. Or this side of town we know is growing more, so maybe we'll use that 10% buffer to account for that. There are some other people who come into the redistricting process and they see a number, that 10%, and they start to think that, well, if a 10% district deviation is good, then maybe a 5% deviation is better. Maybe a 1% deviation would be even better still. And that might be true, that districts with plans with a smaller deviation are inherently better because they're more equally balanced. But it is also kind of a corner that I wouldn't recommend anybody paint themselves into at the beginning of the process. That at the beginning of the process, you leave your options very open. You allow for the line drawing process to happen. You see, 3 or 4 or 5 draft plans, and then you make a decision about where the size of that deviation and how small it should be plays into all of the criteria that the commission or that the RAC is considering. I have seen instances where, agencies try to lock themselves into a 1% deviation rule because it's something easily understood and makes it sound like it's, a good policy. And then later on down the road, they realize that a wider deviation is necessary in order to meet a Voting Rights Act issue or to avoid splitting a city or some other criteria that they're trying to follow. So when we talk about deviation, especially before we even have the data, I like to recommend that we stay within the bounds of the state law and make any decisions about narrower deviations after you've seen draft plans.
Thank you. Any questions online? No questions? Any questions of Mr. Mitchell? Very good. Thank you. So the next item is, Mr. Mitchell, are you doing the outreach talking points?
I think we did them in reverse order.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Okay, so how about the district guard demonstration and video?
I think we covered that and the other one as well.
Okay. Excellent. We're moving right along. So, do we have anyone that's online that has any public comment? Nothing's been submitted. How about here? Any comment? Any comment from the committee members? Yes, Mr. Mooney.
Moving forward with all the face mask requirements, are we you gonna keep us up to date on what the policy is gonna be for each meeting?
Yes, so what we did in previous permutations of this pandemic is you will be bound by either the county policy because it's a county commission, but also the specific, any specific requirements of the location where you are. So for example, if Hutchins Street Square, not to show off and being able to say that, but if they had a specific policy within that facility, we would notify you as soon as possible that that is their specific policy for their building, and otherwise you will be bound by the county policy. I'm just saying if theirs is more specific than ours. I do expect there to be some changes for internal spaces potentially as the county. Just based on the update we got at the board. As soon as we know about those, we will make sure that you know about them. If it is a masking requirement, we will of course have that mask. We'll have some disposable masks. So we have about 22,000 of them, I think, at the county. So yes, we will keep you updated. That will be done by email as soon as we know of a new policy. Additionally, we'll try and facilitate to make sure there's not a compliance issue for each location and for each meeting and outreach. If you are doing individual outreach that's known to the commission, so for example, 2 of you are going to the women's voters, we would ask that you find out what their policy there is, or alternatively to follow the county policy if one changes. And we'll keep you updated. That's a great question. I appreciate it.
Very good question. Okay, once again, any comments from online? And here? Seeing none, all right. Just a couple of notes. After the August 17th meeting, there will be a photo session here. So come prepared to have your photo taken. They're posting them outside someplace. I don't know where they're going to do that. And then also this evening, the RAC members are invited to tour the admin building 6th floor. So if you're interested, take the elevator up to the 6th floor and you'll be able to see the chambers, correct? Very good. And it's 4:58 and the meeting is adjourned. Yes, ma'am. All right. Thank you.